In today's episode, we're covering why the format of situational judgment tests matter and why open response format is the best for evaluating candidates holistically. Let's talk about holistic success. Hi everyone, I'm Kelly Dore, co-founder and VP of Science and Innovation at Acuity Insights. Welcome to this episode of the Holistic Success Show. Our guest today is Dr. Alex MacIntosh, a scientist and senior manager on our research team. I'm really excited Alex is joining me to talk today because he works with so many of our partner schools across the world, looking at research related to not just SJTs, but to admissions broadly, and has a lot of thoughts and really good insights about how the test design actually impacts the assessment and admissions more broadly. So welcome, Alex.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here. Happy to talk about SJTs as always.
All right, Alex, let's get started then, shall we? So let's start and level set. Alex, what is a situational judgment test and how do most of them work?
Sure. So an SJT, it's just an assessment methodology, and it has a relatively long history in employee selection and more recently in higher education. The basic premise of an SJT is that it presents applicants with a dilemma, a hypothetical social or workplace situation. It could be something like someone you're working with isn't pulling their fair share. What do you do? Or, you have a personal or family obligation that conflicts with a new important work event. And how do you navigate that? Obviously, there's better, more nuanced situations, but the general premise might be something like that. And they're intended to evaluate how an individual would react or behave. Right? So since SJTs are just an assessment methodology, it can be applied many, many different ways. It can be context specific, right? So does someone have the knowledge of an expected behavior in a law office or in a medical office or something like that? But they can also be more general in that they can get at how effectively someone uses multiple interpersonal skills and attributes together to navigate any situation that might come up. These are two pretty different goals, right? And how the SJT is set up, how it works, affects how well it can achieve either of those goals.
Okay, so maybe talk for a second then about, two different ways it might be set up for us.
So I would say the vast majority of SJTs are fixed response. And with a fixed response SJT, it gives you prescribed actions or behaviors to choose from as the applicant. So that's like multiple choice questions or ranking the best options, right? In either sense, you're reading the situation, you're watching the scenario, and then you can pick something that already exists there, right? But a bit of a newer trend is the increasing popularity in open response SJTs. So instead of prescribing the option for the applicants to choose from, it's a blank canvas. The applicants are either typing their thoughts out, right, in response to that situation, or they're responding through a video or something like that, right? And you, this way through the open response, you as the applicant, you don't just identify what the right action is or the best response is. You also communicate your decision and the rationale behind it and how you would achieve it and how that plays with everything that you've experienced in your history.
So, Alex, it would seem to me that if you had, say, the same scenario, and with one group of applicants, you asked them you presented that scenario and then gave them a fixed response. And with another group of applicants, you gave them the scenario and presented it with an open response. You'd almost be measuring two very different things for each of those, or not very different, but two slightly different things with those applicant groups.
Yeah, with the fixed response SJT, let's assume you had two of the exact same scenarios, right? With the fixed response SJT, if you were asked as the applicant to choose the most appropriate option, right? Then the test would be assessing whether or not you as the applicant know what the expected behavior is, right? Whereas in the open response SJT, however many of your applicants might actually choose a pretty similar answer, but how they specifically navigate that answer or how they approach the situation or who they say that they thought about during that thought process will all get exposed, right? So your final result, whether it's if we're talking about confronting the person who's not pulling their share, right? I should confront them directly and then work out a solution with the team. That might be one of your fixed response answers. A lot of people might choose to confront them directly, but how and when and what they talk about, you only get the chance to see all that stuff if you have the open response format.
Yeah, very neat. And we will share the link to our Acuity Insights website if people want to dig a little bit deeper into what does an open response SJT look like, because I think there's some fun answers there, and they can try it
Yeah,
on
there's
themselves.
absolutely, there's, I don't know how many, 3 or 4 practice ones, and anyone who's writing the SJT can do a full length practice as well.
Very neat. Okay, let's dig into the open response SJT a little bit more. One of my favorite topics of conversation, but maybe unpack for us a little bit more. What does this actually mean, and how does this format allow admissions professionals to better evaluate the whole student versus a fixed response SJT?
So in an open response SJT like Casper, where responses are so individualized and contextualized, there's no one right answer, right? Now, this is harder in many ways to evaluate. You don't just run it through a Scantron. You have to process what the person says and evaluate it in context. But when you set this up well, you can have an explainable and reliable assessment that's indicative of future success across a broad range of interpersonal situations. And this as a program, it lets you see how some applicants do a better job compared to others in showing how well they can thoughtfully justify their approach, how they can provide creative solutions, how they can carefully consider multiple perspectives. And we made Casper this way because we believe it's reflective of the kinds of professionals that many programs want to graduate and the types of people that you want to have in your community and really in your workforce, right?
Absolutely. Now, Alex, maybe before you go on to the next bit, let me ask you a question. So, some people have asked, because in fixed responses, the way they generate those response options is they engage subject matter experts. How do we at Acuity engage subject matter experts? Maybe think about how those fit into our responsibility
Yeah.
content.
Yeah. Our subject matter experts are involved in the development of the scenarios to a very close degree. We have a quite a rigorous and interactive scenario and question development process. And our subject matter experts are people um, from diverse backgrounds and experiences. Maybe a quarter of them are from health professions, and then we have a large degree of individuals from the community. I'll call it broadly, right? So we have some people with experience in question and test development, some with experience in access and equity of education, and we have just regular community members who want to help build the test, right? So our subject matter experts are individuals who want to be served, so communities that you're serving.
What's exciting to me about that is it's one way to make the community that we're serving really engaged in the admissions process, which isn't always possible in schools and universities and colleges around the world. That there's a really almost sort of a closed door approach. We'll figure it out, but this really opens it. And the reason it excites me is one of the things that we know about being a professional is they tend to have a specialized body of knowledge that they carry, whether we're thinking about somebody in business or engineering or medicine. But one of the things that community does is, maybe if I'm meeting with an engineer, I can't always gauge, their decision making on those nuances, but I can gauge their professionalism. I can gauge if I want to continue to working with them. I can gauge, the interaction that I have with them, and the same, with a physician. Lots of data around that the community members, their adherence to medication and things like that is all funneled through some of these gauges that they have of their professionalism. So it's a really cool
Hmm.
model.
Exactly. I find it very interesting, like it being open response and focusing on what I'll call the general set of interpersonal skills. It makes it much more about if this is the type of person that you want to interact with, you know,
Mm-hmm.
versus does the person know the policies and procedures in my domain, you
Right.
know?
And what's cool about that is we've heard from a variety of different folks, but whether they're consulting firms or employers looking to hire folks upon graduation, that these skills are really important with knowledge and technology changing so very fast that,
Hmm.
yeah, you want folks who can learn that and keep up. But you need these foundational skill sets to really be exceptional leaders of tomorrow.
Hmm. Absolutely. And you see that in the relationship between Casper performance and, like employee job review. We see that we have a case study with a business school in Dalhousie, and their relationship between Casper tests and the co-op ratings is what helped them understand the value of Casper and choose to use it.
So interesting and exciting. I want to get back to the SJT format though. Maybe one question we get asked a lot about these open-ended questions, and you might be getting to it, so I won't jump too quickly to it if you want me to hold, but I'm really interested in sort of, there's no single right answer to this. How do you account for the cultural differences or the life experience differences that folks may have? Like, doesn't that just make it a little bit chaotic to try and compare these to each other?
Short answer is yes. It makes it a little chaotic, right? There's no single right answer. So there's a couple things that we're talking about. One is, you know, our tests are developed in relation to the geography that we're serving. So, if you're applying to a school in the United States and in Canada, then this is the social context that we're operating in, right? So when we're building the test and the types of principles and how you demonstrate your aspects, your equity, your professionalism, your communication skills, that is under the context of this social norm, right? So you see individuals give their response, right? And maybe I'll go back to that example of someone pulling their weight, right? Or someone, actually a very good example that we have is an individual is afraid of public speaking and has to do a presentation in your group, right? How do you get them to do it? Should they do it? How do you approach the situation? This is a little bit of anxiety producing maybe, right? And so an individual might choose to respond, they should absolutely do it. It's their obligation, and here's why. And if they choose to set their cultural context within their response, which you can in the open response, you can say, in this discipline where I'm from, it's most important to get over your fears, and this is why I would do it, and I would work them through this way. That might be a reasonable response. The other reasonable response, say, I want to value their autonomy and their mental health, and I want to support them in every way that I can. So I'm going to do A, B, and C, and D to help them through this process, right? Two kind of different ways of addressing the situation. Both of them might say the final answer might be to get them to do the presentation or not, but you also, as the applicant from your background, get to set your own context and give your history and why it's important. And because we have people reading these responses and judging them like that, they can incorporate that personal history.
As somebody who used to write in the margins of my multiple choice tests, my rationale for picking answers, I love this because it gets into a little bit more of the understanding of why somebody is choosing an answer. It's sort of that show your work versus just your final math response too. And I think it's about the why, maybe then the what.
We see this having an effect in terms of test prep and studying for this test. Because it's open response and there's no right answer, it makes studying for this test kind of irrelevant in some ways. We actually see that people who take third-party test prep company resources that we don't condone,
which we know exist a lot in preparation for colleges and universities.
Yeah, they actually don't do any better on Casper. They do a little bit worse actually overall. And people who choose to do the free resources that we have through the Acuity site, taking the practice test, getting familiar with the timing, getting familiar with where the buttons are on the platform, all that type of stuff, those people end up performing a bit better on the test, right? So the coaching effect is much smaller in open response formats compared to fixed response.
Very, very cool. And it allows like a lot more flexibility in terms of how an applicant can reply, because we know constructs like professionalism vary significantly from culture to culture to culture. And this allows a little bit more of a diverse perspective. Okay, Alex, last year we made a big change. I'm actually really excited about this. It's one of the bigger changes that we've made to the Casper test, and we've made a few. A lot of quality improvement go into this assessment year over year. It's part of the reason our research team are such all-stars in my mind. Last year, we introduced a video response to Casper. So instead of the traditional format of just typing your response in and having 5 minutes, we've now allowed folks for some of the responses, so you have to record, just like we're doing now, a video response. what are the benefits that the data says this has to Casper evaluation of social intelligence and professionalism broadly?
Yeah, sure. So just like the difference between fixed response, like multiple choice, and open response, is about increasing fidelity. It's more representative of what you might actually encounter and how you might actually need to approach something, right? Moving to adding a video response speaks directly to increasing the fidelity. And we know that assessments that are higher in fidelity have improved ecological validity. So that means application to the real world and relevant outcomes, and also generally show smaller gaps in performance across different demographic groups. Right. So a few years ago, when our scientists saw this in the literature, that there was the opportunity to reduce bias through a video response format, we jumped at the chance to figure out how to make it work for Casper. Right. And fortunately, we've seen smaller demographic differences in our video response format, through both our studies in the past 3 years and now that we're halfway through the first official cycle of it, right? So that's very encouraging. That to me is a good enough reason to do it, but it also has come with added benefits, right? So now we have this true, what I'll call mix of modalities, in both how the information, how the scenario is presented. You can read it or you can watch a video about it, and how you can respond to it. Sometimes you're typing it and sometimes you're doing the video like this, right? So you have interaction in both directions. And this gives applicants different ways of expressing themselves that is truer to what you might experience in real life. You have to be able to communicate in different ways, right?
Yeah.
And there's some work that shows that depending on an individual's social or cultural background, different mediums can be more or less effective or natural for them to present it, right? So this mixed method, this mixed modality format that we have in Casper facilitates this interaction. And we're seeing that applicants perceive Casper as well, with this video format as being a highly positive experience, both in terms of the process of writing it and completing the assessment, and also how they see it being fair to all students and effective in evaluating their personal characteristics.
That's pretty exciting, Alex. What does this mean in terms of all the data that we've collected so far on Casper? We have a ton of data around the reliability as well as the predictive value of Casper.
Yeah.
What does this mean with the new format?
Yeah, just in the last 6 to 9 months, we started looking at a few pilot studies around the relationship between Casper video response format and multiple minute interview performance at a few schools, who were early adopters and looking at this information with us. And we've seen that, there is about a 10-point increase in just the raw correlation between Casper and the MMI performance. And it makes sense if you think about it kind of just intuitively. You're adding a video component that's a step closer to being in a one-on-one interview through an MMI, more similar to an MMI. So we're getting closer and closer to that fidelity that I was talking about.
Alex, are there implications for that? We have a lot of programs who don't have the resources to run an interview. So how does this maybe help them?
So MMIs have a couple main purposes, right? Or interviews have a few purposes, right? You get what I'll call the general communication and soft skills component of it, right? But you also get to see the mission alignment, and you get you get some face time with someone you're going to be working with, right? So that's an important aspect of it. So including the video response format in Casper, to me, is a really nice, scalable, reliable way of getting at that general component of those interviews in the MMI sets. So that's why we see the partial correlations.
And so, Alex, we're definitely saying, if you're using an interview, don't throw it out, keep using it. But we've seen a lot of data over time with programs who use an interview or an MMI and also use Casper at different points in their process. Maybe can you share a little bit on what we've seen and how they complement each other when they are
Yeah,
using
for
it?
sure, for sure. So Casper, um, in terms of what I'll call the pre-screening process, is most effective when it's used early across the whole applicant pool, and in terms of identifying candidates who are likely to do very, very well or very, very poorly on the interview, right? So if you have a large pool of candidates that you're not going to be able to interview, that you're unlikely to be able to give the proper depth in terms of holistic review of their whole history and everything like that, then Casper scores can be really helpful in what I'll call grouping candidates into big buckets. Well, maybe you might want to fast track them to prioritize them. Maybe you want to put them in a pile for digging deeper into based on their history and experiences. This is where Casper is very valuable because you see that relationship between top and bottom interview performance.
Awesome. Thanks, Alex. Uh, Alex, thank you so much for sharing all your insights and chatting today. I'm really looking forward to the chance to do this again. To all of you, thank you so much for watching and listening. If you haven't subscribed to our show already, please do so and share this episode with colleagues who may find it useful. And with that, we'll see you in the next episode. If you enjoyed this episode of our show, please be sure to check out the other episodes. And don't forget to subscribe. We have a new episode releasing every week.